All righty. Welcome, everybody. Hope everyone had a great end to September, end to Q3. Already way ahead of your number for Q4, or some people call Q0 because panelists, we're never done, right? There's no rest. You just go to zero. The good news is you're back to zero. The bad news is you're back to zero. Welcome to the hamster wheel. We're already off track. Hey, welcome everybody to our webinar today. I don't know if we call this a webinar. We call this a therapy session. Really, this is a encore of a session that Maria and Kyle and I did at the CMO summit that Pavilion put on in the spring. Well attended, lots of good engagement. We did a benchmark survey at the end of that, which we're going to give to some of you at the end of this as well. And really, out of that and the conversations we had there, realized how big of a problem collaboration drag is for many companies, small, medium, large. And that as we increase the complexity of our go-to-market motions, the complexity of the campaigns we're trying to manage, as well as the complexity of the teams we're trying to orchestrate internally, not just marketing, but with sales and CS, depending on the programs, that is creating collaboration drag. And we want to talk about that today. We're going to define it. We're going to talk about evidence you may see in your organization around it, and then how to resolve it, because our panelists today have all of the answers. So we're going to be watching carefully the chat. I'm looking forward to many of you who are attending today live to be able to interact with us here. If you wouldn't mind, if you're joining us live today in the chat, let us know where you're joining from, where in the world, where in the country you're from. Would love to sort of hear from you, kick things off. And while we do that, I'd love to have the speakers give a quick intro of themselves. So Kyle and Maria, I'll have you guys go first since you were panelists with us in the CMO summit in the spring. And then Casey's super excited to have your perspective here as well. But Maria, why don't you go first?
Hi, I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Maria Pergolino. I'm the executive in residence, or one of the executive in residence at Scale Venture Partners. Essentially, my job is to take all of the amazing experience I've gained from being a CMO at typically companies 100 million to IPO and help other companies scale with that. The go-to-market is an expensive place where a lot of our investment dollars go, and how do we kind of cheat code that a little bit? So this is right on par for what my everyday is like. How do we help optimize? How do we improve organizations? And I just mentioned in chat, I'm currently sitting in Miami. I've spent most of my life in Silicon Valley, but the last couple of years in Chicago, and I am craving a warm winter. So if anybody here is sitting in South Florida as well, I'm looking to build some CMO friends. So please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria. Trading a Chicago winter for a Miami winter, it certainly sounds like an upgrade. So I'm excited for you there. So congrats. And so Maria's role at Scale Ventures certainly is seeing a lot of this firsthand now. And, where she ran marketing at places like, Anaplan and Marketo and others, certainly has a lot of experience on this too. So Kyle, go Colts. I've become enamored. I'm sure you've seen it. This guy that does the Colts song every week.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, I do.
This amazing.
I don't know him, but he's great.
It's amazing.
I recommend it.
Yeah, it's very good. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, of course. But Kyle, thank you for joining. I want you to do a quick intro to yourself as well.
I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, Colts season ticket holder, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how they do this week against Jacksonville. I am not just a CMO. I completely butchered my title when I logged into this app. I'm a CMO at a company called Jellyfish. We're an engineering management platform, Series C. Most of my experience has been starting my career at a company called ExactTarget, which I had nothing to do with our IPO or acquisition, but that's where I started my career in software, and have also spent time at a VC firm, grew a company to 30 million and sold it, and also spent a little bit of time at an exec level at a company around 200 million in revenue. So managing budgets from 5 million to 40 million and all the pain and suffering that comes in between that.
Well, and I think you've got great historical perspective on this as well as real-time perspective as your team has grown, as your organization has grown. And when you grow the team, when you grow the complexity of the motions, that exponential change certainly creates collaboration drag if you don't proactively address it. So excited to have your
absolutely. You're a great moderator, Matt. You're great.
I'm just here to pump up the panelists and really make you guys shine. Speaking of making people shine, Casey Jenkins, SVP of Marketing at Sendoso, not only facing collaboration drag as you grow your organization. But I think inherently organizations that are using Sendoso and adopting sort of non-digital sort of offline formats into their go-to-market motions are creating complexity and potentially inviting collaboration drag if they don't think about it and don't manage it themselves. So quick introduction for yourself as well, please.
Yes. Hello. I am currently the SVP of Marketing at Sendoso. We, over the past year, have made quite a bit of change in terms of the way that we run marketing, the way we goal marketing, and the way we collaborate across revenue, the revenue team as a whole. I previously sort of came up in my career as a marketing leader at a company called Fastly, which is a very successful content delivery network. I was with them from about 25 engineers all the way through IPO. So we went through a lot of iterations of that company and many different versions of collaboration drag along the way. And revenue from single-digit millions all the way to 200 million on that journey. So lots of great experience there for this conversation. And Matt's right. We do work with a lot of customers who are working through different iterations of collaboration issues across ABM and across sales and marketing and CX. And I am excited to dig in.
So I think this issue has existed for a long time. I know about a year ago, Gartner wrote their keys for CMO success in 2024. I can't remember what the second one was, but I remember the third one was AI, and the first one was actually addressing collaboration drag. And I've always thought about this in terms of the solution and marketing orchestration helping teams, but I'd never heard that phrase collaboration drag before. And so they define it as sort of inefficiencies and delays that occur when teams within an organization struggle to collaborate effectively. They also put some numbers behind it. They said those that experience high levels of collaboration drag are 37% less likely to meet their revenue targets. It's in part because the speed to market decreases, the agility decreases. There's a morale hit when people feel like they're in too many meetings, too many Slack channels, too many people involved to get just this what used to be a simple thing done when the organization was smaller or when the go-to-market motions were quote unquote simpler. So would love to have a couple of you, Maria, maybe start with you, just like when you think of collaboration drag, what are some examples and evidence of that you've seen in organizations?
I mean, I think that there's some obvious ones, right? It's higher turnover. It's people that have been with the company a long time, not feeling like they're being leveraged well. I think it's new people not feeling like they can hook in and provide value. It is you see it through our people, which is where you want to minimize. And I think Kyle and Casey would agree, being at these fast growth companies, the saying that I say the most, if you are close to me, you probably are annoyed by it because I say it so much, but you can't get to an exceptional outcome without doing something exceptional, period. Like if you want to have this tremendous result, this great growth, an IPO, whatever it is, you have to find a way to do better than everybody else. And this is one way that can take you off that track. So you want to have that high growth, you got to put effort in here. I think that's why all of us are excited to talk about this.
And I think for some companies, it's a growing pain as you get bigger. I think our research shows that once you get to about 20 to 25 people in your marketing org, you really feel collaboration drag deeply, which means it's been there and growing for a while. And I would argue it's sort of like maybe it's even a rite of passage to sort of have to address that because your team's getting bigger. Used to have one or two people that did a lot of things. Now you have a lot of people doing a few things. So getting the webinar out with a bigger team alone is a bigger lift if you don't coordinate that well. But the growing complexity of the go-to-market motions that are necessitated by B2B marketing today require you to think about this differently. And so, Kyle, I'm curious from your perspective, as you've grown teams and as you've grown complexity of programs, what are some of the pieces of collaboration drag you have had to address proactively?
I mean, as a team scales, it's kind of death by a thousand cuts, and a lot of it has to do with approval processes. And sometimes it's very much dependent on domain expertise in a team. I think you can see that in any company that's scaling past a founder-led sales motion, or where you have the persona being the CEO that you sell to, and that happens a lot because an entrepreneur sees a problem and something they deal with on a day-to-day basis, so they start a company to kind of help with that. I mean, for me, that's been the biggest thing, is that how can you look at your org as it scales and make sure that you're seeing where the cuts are happening, so you can try to minimize it. And I always go to, what's the process of getting approvals for things to get pushed out the door, right? Ship constantly. I mean, it's the same mantra as any R&D team. We take the same thing on from a marketing team's perspective. And like you said, if it goes from 10 to 20 to 40 to 60 people, that's going to change dramatically, but you still should try to be shipping as constantly as possible.
That's right. And Casey, relative to that last point, right? Like, we're all good. Some of us better than others. I get probably the sort of establishing plans and strategies up front, but then you execute and you modify, and new ideas and opportunities show up. And when we look at what are sort of the most common frustrations and outputs of not addressing collaboration drag, it's speed to market, lack of speed to market, it's lack of agility, and then increased sort of morale hit. And that second piece, I think, is really critical, because if you say, listen, it's taking so long just to get the normal stuff done, and now you've got this new idea, right? I'm frustrated by how much work I have to do. I'm frustrated by how long it takes to get done. Talk a little bit about that agility piece and why addressing collaboration drag is so important to creating a more agile, functional marketing unit.
I think in addition to sort of like what is the approval process, the areas that I start to see suffer most when you have this type of misalignment are how are people making decisions? And if you don't have alignment around your top priorities across a go-to-market team, you start to have people making decisions based on different factors that aren't in alignment. And so they start to argue about what's most important to get done. And then everyone gets blocked. Mm-hmm. And I've seen this a lot of times. I've seen it also extend to product and product roadmap and how you're making decisions about and indexing for like pace of innovation within a company, which ties directly to marketing. In my opinion, our success depends on alignment there as well. So yeah, I think it's how are you empowering your team to be really, really tightly in step across, like when there is a decision to be made or a priority to be navigated, do you have a shared source of truth that the folks at the top have all stamped so that you can get that out of the way really quickly, and it's not an argument, based on everyone's personal opinions. And then, as Kyle just mentioned, like, does that trickle all the way down so that people feel empowered to make decisions and move quickly? As soon as that starts to gum up, you get all sorts of problems happening where people are arguing and morale is down and things aren't getting out the door, and pretty bad deal.
Yep.
Can I jump in here? I couldn't agree with Casey and Kyle more, which I know maybe doesn't sound exciting when everybody's agreeing, but I think that one thing that can be misconstrued here is this idea that, like, hey, you need to set the agenda and everybody should follow, or just be outcomes based, or empower decision making. But there's a natural conflict in our teams that I think is worth addressing. You can take any role. Let's say somebody in SEO, or let's say somebody in marketing operations. They want to do their job really well. I just trust that everybody wants to do a great job. And so doing the best possible job in your role is not always the way to drive to that outcome. So for example, let's say that you've decided as the CMO or CEO that you're going to do a big conference, and you're going to drive your customers to that conference, and that conference is going to be focused on upsell and cross-sell. That digital marketer that's great at PPC may really need to help work the door, and that may be the best use of their time. But it's in conflict with the fact that they want to go to their next job and tell people what how great they did in doubling the budget of their campaign. And so there is a conflict built in here that we have to address and we have to be aware of, because they're not wrong in wanting to do more in their function. It just doesn't get to the outcome. And so you have to find a way as a CMO to think about that, to recognize that, and to reduce that conflict, either having hiring plans that use people to their full capacity, or making sure incentives match so that they feel excited about helping in at the door that day. Or then there's a trade for their gain later. And so I just want to call that out, because this all seems so obvious when you talk about it, but it actually is filled with friction.
It absolutely is. Thank you for jumping in and sharing that. I think, we could spend hours talking about and complaining about collaboration drag, but I do want to get into some of the things that I think create better orchestration amongst teams. And there's 4 specific areas that I want to dig into, that we did some benchmarking on this with the CMO Summit attendees. We're going to do some polling questions here in a minute as well, just to sort of get a sense for attendees here and sort of how you feel about your own org around this. Fascinating as we do this, and we didn't know this when we first planned this topic and this date, but a couple weeks ago, Amazon famously said, okay, everyone back to the office 5 days a week. And for a company that makes so many decisions based on data, it was interesting to me that there was no data in that decision at all. I didn't see anything that data-wise justified doing that. And a lot of companies are saying, if I can just get my people together, if I can just get them back in the office, things will get better. I don't think this is a location problem. I think it's an orchestration problem. How you orchestrate how people work together, how you coordinate that work, how you coordinate the roles and the processes and accountability, all the things that we're going to talk about here today, I think is much more important than physically where you are. I'm old enough, I love getting in the office with people, but to me, orchestration is the key. So I want to walk in, and Casey, you mentioned a key part of this, that this is not just the marketing teams driving orchestration. We need broader go-to-market orchestration. Marketing, sales, CS, product. The better we can get those teams in tune with each other, agreeing on strategy and direction, but then also agreeing on how to get things done better on a Tuesday, really, really important. So I want to start with this concept of cross-functional communication and collaboration. And let's throw up a poll. We're going to have a couple poll questions that are going to match the benchmarking that we did at the CMO Summit. So I'd love to get it, as we address this question as a panel, I'd love to get you that are attending to answer this question for us. Just how would you rate your organization's cross-functional communication and collaboration? And you're going to see sort of a good, better, best set of definitions: initial, ad hoc, defined, managed, optimized. And as best you can, let us know where you are. And thank you, Mary, for putting the polling question up there. But for our panel, I would love to say, what do you believe are some of the keys to doing that well? What have you seen work well in your organizations, or Maria and those companies you're advising, to improve communication? We have so many communication tools, and sometimes the tools themselves are counterproductive if we don't have a good strategy behind them.
Did you call on somebody, Matt?
I thought I called on Maria, but I might have just referenced Maria. It's entirely possible that I did not make that very clear.
You're such a good moderator. We're just kind of waiting.
So why don't you go ahead?
I do want to address the in-person and remote work environment. I think you got to balance it. I think you have to meet in the middle, and it's dependent on every company. There are cases where better collaboration happens in person, and it's the leadership's directive to recognize that and to understand when it needs to happen. It can't be either or. And I think that is very, very, very important. It's all dependent on the leadership team. It's depending on the people in the seats. It's depending on how hard it is to get things done in a remote environment. Like for me, I can do both, but I can orchestrate both. But when I'm in the office meeting with a leadership team, things just get done in what I feel like is a easier, better, more strategic way than if we're on Zoom. Now, that's the leadership team. That's where I exist today. Doesn't mean it's the same for a different company, but it's very, very important that we manage expectations appropriately with your leadership team. So from a tactical, I have a ton of different tactical things, but I'll pause there because I think it also depends on hiring, who you're hiring and when you hire senior people and senior ICs and people with experience and all that stuff. But I'll pause there for Maria and Casey to respond. Specifically to your question as well, Matt.
I think there are great collaboration tools that you can use online that are getting better and better. Miro comes to mind, where you can do things that you'd have to be in the room for, whiteboarding, creating maps. And, a gain from some of that is that you then can keep it, right? It is something that lives on beyond what I just do with Kyle and the whiteboard in the corner. But I think we got into this situation where we raced to some of those tools because it was, because of what was happening with COVID and work from home, and there wasn't proper enablement. There's not a single approach that we're all taking, and we don't know all how to get the same gain. So there's something that still has to be solved there. We're not at the end. There hasn't been a standard. I think that even if you come together in an office, they're often not in that physical. They're not often set up for what we need to do. We need to be able to have more collaboration times. We need to have more time aligning. Yet we go into these offices that are mixed in big rooms with maybe hoteling desks, not big enough meeting space to bring a whole group together. And so there's a retooling that has to happen. I love the last CEO I worked with at Active Campaign, Jason. He makes this joke every time I talk to him that he has office space available. But the office is such a beautiful office. It just feels empty. Right. And so how do you get your best collaboration when that's happening, even when all the resources are there, when it doesn't have the right energy? And so I think that I don't have all the answers, but those are the things that we have to solve for. Just because you bring everybody together does not mean that it's solved or it's the right environment. Casey, I'm excited to hear from you because I know you work for Sendoso that's trying to connect people through some, bringing some items to their doorstep.
Yeah, we're fully remote, and so we do what Kyle was describing, bring people together for like annual planning and important strategy sessions. We like to do those in person, but we do a lot remotely, and I think there's an element of figuring out and setting sort of a standard across the company that everyone understands for how do you communicate what tools are we using for what. We had a point in time where everyone was indexing so heavily over Slack and nothing was getting into the Rike or Asana or whatever project management tool. It was just disappearing into the Slack void, that we had to figure out both how to connect Slack to those tools and how to get people straight in there to manage projects together and actually have a source of truth. We combine project management tools and working together. Our entire company uses the same tool. And so we have everyone in the same tool, including our leadership team, which has helped quite a bit for us to all be in alignment and have sources of truth and sources for our OKRs and our major projects and collaboration. But also we have sort of given advice on here's when to Slack someone, here's when to put it in a doc. We're heavy Google Docs users. And then we supplement that, Maria, I guess this is a morale and, human connection thing, but we do a lot of team bonding type, virtual events. We make pizza together. We learn how to do various things on, on Zoom because we're not together. And we'll do that across teams. So if two leaders are sensing that there's friction or there's something off, we'll put them together and we'll make everyone make a pizza or something. And it sort of helps just diffuse that because people can see each other's kitchen and they can see each other's tap. And it helps you understand someone as a person versus being in that mode of transactional, I need this from you and why am I not getting it? So, that sounds maybe kind of touchy-feely, but it actually does work pretty well.
Well, until robots do all this work for us, which who knows, might be in the offing, I think you still have to address the human element of this, right? That is, not just sort of how the work gets done, but people that can feel overwhelmed by not just the work on their plate, but the volume of communication required to get that work done. I look at the clock. I want to move on to the next topic. We've kind of started to cover this a little bit, and I appreciate you, Kyle, throwing in some of the tools that you guys use. So we talked a little bit about sort of cross-communication, collaboration. I want to talk a little bit about sort of technology and project management tools in your organization. So we got another polling question. It's got the same rating, so you're going to see the same question answer set for each of these questions. But I want to understand, how would you rate your use of tools in your organization? And maybe as Kyle, you kind of maybe address this first, since you already answered this. Maybe Casey and Maria kind of throw in some of the tools into chat that you've used before. However, that said, just because you have a tool doesn't mean you're using the tool, right? Just because you bought CRM doesn't mean your sales teams are using it. Just because you bought Asana or Monday.com doesn't mean your team is using it or using it effectively. I think sometimes we throw technology at our teams, and without a strategy or approach, it's counterproductive. So Kyle, with those tools that you mentioned, what are some of the keys to helping them be most effective and help your team be most successful?
I put it in chat, but my team is brilliant at using these collaboration tools. I am not, to be honest with you. So I think calling myself out and, sending it out as topic of conversation for everybody, you need to be using it as much or better than your teams, as long as you're not the one creating the collaboration drag by using the tool.
Yeah.
But I think that the most important thing to do as a leader is to empower your team to be able to make decisions on which technology they want to use. From a cross collaboration standpoint, at Jellyfish, we use a lot of things. Confluence is in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that Slack is where a lot of work gets done, honestly, in our environment. But for me, as long as the team is using it productively and I have a way to understand what's happening and I can communicate that out, then that's the best thing to do on my side.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of different tools for different purposes. And I think sort of having a real defined, like, here's what to do and not to do, here's where to use certain things. I think, Maria, sometimes even saying, listen, like, here's the tools that you're going to kind of have access to on a regular basis. Here's those that are never going to have sort of something urgent, right? So you don't need to be constantly in all these tools all the time, because you got to be getting work done as well. So Maria, curious how you have seen that work, and even real time as you're working with scale clients and portfolio companies, what are you seeing?
Yeah, one, as an executive on the team, I think you want to respect your IT team. You want to respect your security team. So you want to harbor innovation and use innovative tools, but you also want to not use something that IT hasn't approved, especially as I think it's fair to say, as executives, we care about risk more. You don't want to be the person that has caused an issue that allows for some data challenge. And so as a CMO, part of your job now is like trying to really hear the team and what they want to use, trying to bridge with IT and the development teams to make sure that it can be used, and try to let marketing potentially lead the way in what's going to be standard versus kind of bringing what you just used at your last company, because there are some other concerns that come into play now that we didn't maybe have to think about the same way 5 years ago. And I don't mean to that kind of sounds boring and not that exciting, but I think that that's part of our job and the reality now, given the current landscape.
Yep. Casey, I have a slightly different question on this for you. Is I think that we think of the tool sets as communication and collaboration tools, but as a completely virtual team, I think building community and fostering community and helping your team feel like a real team that cares about and supports each other. How can the collaboration tools and the project management tools support that? Or is that not their role, and am I extending to things they should be doing?
I think when you aren't all in one project management tool and everyone is using a different one, it definitely intensifies the feeling of separate teams, separate priorities, separate universes. Everyone feels sort of like they're in their own little bubble. So we actually had that happening here and blew it up and forced everyone into one, which made everyone extremely sad inside for a little bit. But then it actually paid dividends, because we can all point to the same place. We can build forms and Slack integrations and triggers that help us all use it smarter. I agree with Kyle. I have been probably the worst at getting my own work into the project management tool, and I'm trying really hard to get better and manage it there. but our leadership team took this on and said, we have to manage our meetings and all of our stuff in here. We have to be in here showing we're in here. We have to model it. So I think there's that aspect of like, we are all one team collectively across this whole org in here planning together and holding each other accountable. And when we hold meetings, when we hold our pipeline review and our business weekly review, we're using that project management tool and we're going through it and everyone's updating that weekly. That's sort of like a unifying feeling. We are heavy Slack users here. We don't use much email, and in Slack, I think there's other ways that you can, teach teams to build channels for specific projects, add people cross-functionally, and add your external contributors in there and have them all working as one group in that team so everyone can see everything, and that adds to transparency. And then I think there's little things you can do, which I am not as good at, to be honest, but Austin, who I think is in here on our team, is a magician of custom emojis. And like when someone joins the team or we get a new contractor, he'll make them a little emoji, and we make little emojis for our projects and for our cross collaboration. We have emojis for our values. And so there's a lot of ways we do that we use Slack to make people feel like part of something bigger that connects them together.
Have I showed you guys this? Have you guys seen this the Heinzie? It's a Heinz ketchup bottle that is like a flush ketchup bottle. And it's right back there. You can see it.
The Heinzie.
It's back there.
Is that the official name?
It's a Heinzie. Yeah, I did not name this, but it's a Heinzie. And so this is a helmet sticker. And so we've actually like give helmet stickers to people, and I don't know where to point, but we have Heinz marketing helmets and everyone has one. We mail them to people and they have them at their desks. But this is also an emoji, right? So we can we give people Heinzies for doing things that are exhibits of our values. And so someone can emoji something with a Heinzie and say, "Yep, that was a values-driven approach," or whatever, right? So I'm happy to bring it.
We have hundreds that have been created internally, hundreds.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure we have 30-something different versions of our logo as an emoji that people have created. I mean, they love it.
What do the brand police feel about that?
Oh, we love it. It's fine.
Yeah,
as long as they're not sharing it externally.
There you go. All right. So I want to move on to the next section. So we've covered cross communication, collaboration, talk a little bit about the tools that we're using. Before we move to our next section, I love the chat going on here. Thank you so much, everyone, for chiming in, for sharing. I do want to make sure that we're getting questions from you. So we got a little more of sort of me asking some questions, getting through the sort of collaboration drag framework. But there's on the right-hand side, you should see Q&A. If you have a question for our panelists at large, if you have a question for a specific panelist, please throw that in the Q&A section. I'll keep track of that as we go, and we'll make sure we ask some of those as we go over and have a little bit of time at the end as well. But I want to get to our third topic, which is around strategic planning and how your strategic planning process kind of triages what work's getting done. Like we can be hamsters on a meal forever and just say, like, let's just get more done, be more efficient, but being more efficient with a non-triage list by not addressing what the right strategic focus areas are, not just as marketing leaders, but across go-to-market motions, product, marketing, sales, CS. So the next polling question, same answers, but different question. How would you rate your strategic planning process? And this is the part of the workshop where we see how vulnerable our attendees can be in sharing how strategic planning processes actually happen. We all live in glass houses. We're a small consulting firm. We have the same challenges as well. But maybe we go in reverse order. Maybe Casey, start with you. What are some keys, whether they are fully realized or just things you're still work in progress? What are some keys to improving strategic planning and that connection between planning and execution?
I think starts with what's your sort of North Star as a company, and how do you make sure that's extremely clear across all departments and being upheld by everyone in every department. So, for us, we have, sort of a quarterly look at is what are those top goals for the company that we want to champion. Obviously, there's going to be revenue and retention up there. And then we will typically have a customer happiness or customer health goal worked in there as well. We have an OKR and an annual planning process where we get all of our leaders into one sheet. And they have to meet, and that we have to, like, we build goals together where everyone can see them, and we look at the overlap, and we look at the cross-functional dependencies, and we talk through them. We were not doing that previously. Everyone was sort of like coming with their department goals to the meeting, and then we had just sort of like a mess of like, Kyle needs this from Casey, and Casey didn't build that into her plan at all, and so everything's upside down and has to be redone. And so we start there. And then, we bit, so like any dependency I have is built into, sales's plan and vice versa. And then I think, one thing we've done across sales and marketing and CX is we've looked at, okay, we have expansion goals, we have new business goals. Obviously we have, revenue goals, and I have taken total ownership of pipeline with dependencies, that are very clearly expressed and documented to sales and to our partner team and to our CX team. Our sales team owns revenue, but marketing, obviously has to help make that number happen. And we've eliminated the sort of like back and forth of like, oh, did sales touch this last or first? Did marketing touch this last or first? Who gets credit for this thing? Which has just unified us more as a whole and eliminated the weird behavior that starts to happen when people are trying to justify why they deserve credit over a different team.
Cool. Kyle, I'm curious for you, as the team has grown, as Jellyfish has grown, has your approach to strategic planning and how those cadences, communications happen, has that changed at all as the company's grown and evolved?
I mean, we take a pretty untraditional approach to the North Star. I mean, we have a weekly business review from an exec team perspective where we look at a lot of what Casey's already mentioned: GRR, NRR, net new bookings, pipeline, coverage, sales manager forecast, sales forecast, product usage by SKU. And as an exec team, we go through it every week. And that is pretty much the strategic direction, right? I mean, there's of course high-level messaging and positioning and where we want the product to go, but we definitely orient around the business metrics. Like, how do we align against the business metrics? What has changed since I've joined, which has been 2 years today, or yesterday actually, is leading indicators become more important between sales and marketing. So when we started with a pipe, like I'm a huge, Casey's already mentioned it, huge believer in pipeline models, stage 1, stage 2, coverage, all that stuff, and owning it between sales and marketing. I think that creates collaboration no matter what. What we've discovered pretty recently is that we need to be looking at it by rep. Like, we're not even looking, like, you've got segment, you've got total pipeline, but what does every single rep's coverage look like, and how can we help support that? And that's an attack from a tactical perspective, and it's very different from what I've experienced in the past, but it's all positive. It's driving collaboration between sales managers, my direct reports. How do we create a very surgical approach to pipeline development for each rep, whether they're ramping or not? Because we're hiring. I mean, we're hiring pretty dramatically in the next 3 months, especially on the sales side. So how we do that's very important. That's the one thing, if we're aligning around the metrics, that has changed pretty dramatically over the past 2 years for me.
Maria, as we wrap this up, I want to address kind of Penny's question, because it's one thing for us to try to do this well in our marketing organizations. I think the teams that we work regularly with, especially marketing, or especially sales and CS, like, is there a cadence required? Is there a cadence that works to say, this isn't an annual planning thing, we have to make adjustments and sort of reiterate priorities along the way? What have you seen work best to do that?
Yeah, I think the entire leadership team, but definitely on the marketing side, you have to bring a voice to what I call, I don't know if this is what everybody calls, but the rhythm of the business. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty obsessed. I just led a discussion within the Scale portfolio on strategic planning and how that ties to the marketing plan. I think if you are in marketing and you receive a budget before your corporate planning, there is something broken in the plan. The plan should inform what finance.
Can you wait? Can you repeat what you just said? Because if we take away anything from this call, it's that right here. So just repeat it one more time.
If you are receiving a financial plan before you've done your corporate planning, there's something wrong with your whole company plan. Essentially, and this is why the rhythm of the business is important. There should be a flow to this, and you may be, take some lead in helping to find that flow. Even if you're not the CMO, if you're within the team, thinking about when the communications happen, there should be a communication after potentially the board meeting, so the team knows what happened at that board meeting, so that can inform changes to the plan. That should maybe be followed by some type of press statement that's highlighting anything. There's a flow that can happen that, one, increases efficiency because you're not having to replicate messages or recreate. And then there's a clarity that comes from thinking about that rhythm of the business. As it hits for something like sales feedback, and this question is a really important question around making meetings effective. You have to start again with that plan. What is the purpose of the meeting? If it is I totally believe in the weekly forecast call where marketing is saying, hey, this is how we're going to the monthly, and then this is how it's achieving to the quarterly. But being really clear on what is supposed to happen in that meeting, what it's supposed to achieve, and making sure that it's not about being punishing, but to understand where you have to make adjustments. So, hey, if marketing's going to come up short, how are we going to manage that so that we can achieve success for the organization? The biggest, I mentioned in the beginning that I help companies from 100 million to IPO, and people think that's all about growth or efficient growth, but the job is two things, and I would argue they're both equally important. It is predictability and growth. Being able to make a dollar that you didn't know you're making is not half as good as knowing that you're going to make that dollar. And overachieving doesn't matter if you couldn't forecast it. What you're trying to do to become a public company, or actually for any investor, what they want is predictability. They want to know what their money is going to make. And so it's that beat and race. So as much as you can bring predictability and getting into a rhythm of the business that brings that predictability, it is a really important part of our jobs.
Boy, I think we just opened a can of worms, guys. This is a whole other topic.
Can we just close it?
We'll just close. That was it.
That's it. We're done. The idea of saying you have to start with corporate strategy first and then things flow from there. It sounds obvious, but how many people in the organization, how many people in the C-suite understand and or agree with or have consensus around the corporate strategy? What are we doing here? Who are our owners? What are we trying to achieve at this stage? What's the next step, and how does go-to-market strategy and market opportunity flow from there?
I think it's also important to note that this changes dramatically depending on the scale of the company. A corporate plan at a 200 and Maria, we all know this, right? $200 million company is very different than when you're trying to find product market fit at 1 to 10, and when you're trying to find scale at 30, right? It just, the amount of time and energy you spend on changing something, and when you're trying to speak to 1,500 employees compared to 200 compared to 500, it's just very, so again, I think we said this at the beginning, it's very dependent on where you're at. And don't get discouraged if you don't have that in place as you're trying to find product market fit, or you just raised your Series A or B and it's a dumpster fire. Guess what? It's always a dumpster fire. That's why we're in high growth software. But just remember that it's up from where you're at.
Yeah.
No matter where you're at.
What do you do if you get a financial plan and you haven't done that strategic planning, right? There's probably people on the call, it's October, that's probably the case for next year. Mm-hmm. Instead of being frustrated, what I do is I look at that financial plan and I look at all the changes from the previous year and I know what it should be doing. So if all of a sudden, revenue has to increase by 20%, but budgets are coming down by 10%, I write down that strategy. There's a strategic decision made that nobody talked about. And I note all of the strategic decisions in the plan, and then I present it forward and I say, hey, I looked at the financial plan. It looks like it's saying this. Do we agree? is this really what we believe can happen? And in some cases it's yes, but if not, then it creates a great discussion, right? It's like, what can you do about it? And I think just using that and bringing it back and making it clear to everybody what that financial plan is bringing, because it seems great sometimes on paper, just increase efficiency by 20% while reducing the budget by 20% while also doubling growth. Easy.
Just push the buttons and it'll all happen.
That marketing automation.
I think just making that list, making sure it's clear what the assumptions are and talking about where it could fail, and then measuring and then building in that weekly reporting back to the original question, like, hey, this is what would have to happen for this plan to happen. And as you start seeing early on that that's not the case, addressing it. That's how you bring
and
that.
Has that
that's
ever
the best way
happened
to
before? Do it. Has it ever happened before? Like, is there any evidence, or is it based in any fact?
Well, even if it hasn't happened before, at least build a model that's directionally accurate. So you can say, hey, CEO, you just told me to grow to 5 million from 2 million, and you're giving me 300 grand less. Here's where we're actually going to end up if historic numbers continue in that direction. So Maria, your question, I mean, that's what I've done. If you're given a financial plan, you get, okay, here's what we're going to get if things don't change. And here's another plan that I think could work better. Let's talk about both and where we can meet in the middle, especially if you don't have that set up at the beginning.
I think this is the most critical. This is the most critical part of the conversation for marketers, because this is where we get upside down so quickly, and we just take what's given to us. We don't present it back. We don't present like, this is how it would look if this is how it looks according to plan that you gave me. Here's how it would look if we did it this way, or I had more budget, or I had more headcount, or whatever. We sign up for being upside down, and then we don't deliver, and then we get fired. So it's like critical.
Yeah, well, it's also trying to understand why the decision was made, right? Like, what is the North Star metric that the CFO has in their head that they're trying to align? And if you don't have a CFO, what's your CEO trying to align to? Sometimes it's growth, sometimes it's profitability, whatever, gross margin. But most of the time, like you said, we don't ask those questions. We're like, oh, thank you for giving me money to market this company. I'm going to go use it. Well, fight for more money, especially if you've raised money, as long as you're staying within the parameters of how to grow an efficient business. But you got to be aligned, and that goes back to the collaboration side. Sorry, Matt, I interrupted you.
No, this is.
I drank a bunch of Celsius, which I don't recommend.
I love it. Well, I hope everyone is enjoying episode 1 of the Revenue Revival podcast that we're just going to keep doing on a regular basis, because I'm enjoying myself. I don't know about y'all on the panel and those of you watching. This is fun. 2 things. 1, I'm really disappointed that SQL is editing and censoring my posts. I didn't swear. I said friggin', and it still wouldn't let me write friggin'. Wow. So I'm saying it, and you can hear it, so it's not censoring that. Take that, bots. Also, I think sometimes when it comes to planning, like to your point, Kyle, about stages of the business, if you're a bigger company, like you're not going through as much gyrations of figuring out product market fit. I will say, however, that when you're early stage, sometimes that trying to find that is used as an excuse for chaos. And I had a sales leader counterpart that had a sign on the top of his whiteboard that said, "Startups don't starve, they drown." Right? You still have to make decisions. You still have to, like, strategy is choosing. What Michelle's writing, no, this could get out of hand. So anyway, all right, we got a few minutes left. I want to quickly address sort of the issue of roles and processes, and then I want to talk about. I mentioned this is sort of an encore and a much more lively and entertaining version of the CMO summit session we had in the spring. We asked all the CMOs attending to answer the questions we're asking all of you to answer. And so I've got some benchmark data broken out by industry with some surprising results I want to share before we're out today. Ooh. But the 4th area of focus is roles and responsibilities. And we probably should have done strategy last, because I don't know if we're going to have as much fun on this one. Because roles and responsibilities, roles and processes. I mean, I don't know about you guys, like I have an org chart for our company, but what I like better is our accountability chart that makes it really clear who owns what, who is responsible for driving things. The things may be a team effort. There may be a team sport, but someone has the accountability around that. So let's throw up our last poll question. How would you rate established roles and processes in your organization? Same answers, different questions. So for our panelists, how do you think about org chart? How do you think about accountabilities? How do you create clarity around who's responsible for what and how those things get done?
I remember my answer here. I had somebody reach out and ask me to do, I didn't do it yet, but like a podcast just on this topic. That was a recruiter. And essentially what I said then and what I stand by is you build the org without the people in mind, that you think about what it is that you have to achieve. And then you build an org that will achieve that goal. And then you look at the team and move everybody into those roles. And the reason that's important, and I think this is whether you manage a 3-person team or a 300-person team, I stand by this, is that one, it means that everybody has an important role. It's not just that their role carried forward from 5 years ago. It's clear what they're there to do. It also allows you to build a better relationship with finance because you know where you're making exceptions. So what I hate is like somebody leaves and they were a manager, but what I really need is a director in the role. And so I go and like have to, with my tail between my legs, go to finance and be like, I need to backfill with a director. And then I have to get all these approvals. Instead, when I build the plan, I know, hey, this should be a director role, but we're going to make an exception because we think this employee is great. And we're going to try to train them up to that. We're going to put in a manager, but I'm going to let finance know ahead of time. If this person was to leave, the ideal is that this would be a director. This would be the ideal structure. Here's where I made exceptions. And this is how it's evolving. And it really changes the conversation later because you have this document that says, hey, this is where I might need to make changes. This is where I'd have to adjust things. So it serves both in making sure the team has really powerful roles. Everybody knows how they're going to be measured, and also where you're making exceptions to the ideal so that finance is clear on what changes could happen.
Yeah. All right, we're going to just a couple minutes left. And so I want to sort of start to wrap a little bit. We've got one final polling question that we'll throw up in a minute, just really about ranking this conversation. The panelists didn't know, but someone's getting voted off the Revenue Revival podcast for the next episode. So would love to get your feedback on this.
Wait, we're doing live NPS on the conversation we're having right now?
Brutal.
Basically, it's, listen, it's all about innovation. But I did before, so I wanted to quickly highlight sort of what we saw from looking at the CMOs at the Pavilion event and what they answered and sort of where they ranked. And so, as you see, like good, better, best, we got 5 answers. So if you're middle of the road, you're getting a score of a 3, right? On a scale of 1 to 5. The average sort of benchmark or the average analysis on the collaboration drag diagnostic from the CMOs in the spring was a 2.6.
Wow.
What industry? So first of all, the average was rating themselves on the low end of the maturity curve scale of having those things in place. We were then able to break it down by industry. What industry do you think had the highest or among the highest rankings in terms of maturity level on addressing collaboration drag and addressing marketing or go-to-market orchestration? Any guesses? So healthcare was a 2.
No idea.
Healthcare was a 2 on average. Software and tech was a 2.6. The highest was manufacturing at a 2.8, which you're initially like, wow, because we don't always think of manufacturing, especially from a SaaS and our little SaaS bubble, as sort of the most innovative. But from a process and orchestration standpoint, like that's been in their DNA forever. So not entirely surprising that there may be some lessons and some best practices from some industrial businesses for us to learn from. So thank you everyone for answering those first 4 questions we have there from the attendees today. We'll be able to add you to our benchmark data to be able to sort of show where people are. We won't have all of your industry data, of course, but to have some aggregate information. And if you'd like to see kind of where your organization benchmarks against the overall group as well as those in your industry, let us know. We're happy to do that as well. This has been a lot of fun, guys. Any final thoughts on where this is and where this is going, or any sort of rants that we didn't quite get to earlier?
I mean, bring the robots on. I'm ready. Talk about collaboration. I'm using it daily. It's a completely different Revenue Revival episode. But
100%.
No, it's always appreciative to hear what people are thinking and how to collaborate more often, because we're kind of on an island as marketing leaders.
And to what Brandon said here and what you mentioned around ripping the Band-Aid off, I think, until robots sell to robots or until robots do the collaboration for us, there's a human element. So in making changes to how we operate, there's a culture change component. And oftentimes culture change is directly tied to fear. And people pretty quickly get to the bottom of the pyramid, right? In terms of wondering, am I going to make my mortgage payment? Am I going to have enough money if I don't keep this job? And there's a fear of change, a fear of doing something differently. So I know we're out of time, but I think and I heard you guys, there's echoes in this through a lot of your comments as well, is that how we manage that as leaders, how we show people a path, how we create some humanity and empathy as part of that process, not just in marketing, but across sales and marketing and CS teams where we may historically not have gotten along and seen things the same way. We're all in this with the best of intentions. We're all in, nobody wins or loses as a department. We win or lose as a team, as a company. So, okay. Well, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Thank you guys. Maria, Kyle, Casey, thank you so much for being part of this. This was a lot. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for everybody who was part of the chat, who contributed to this. Thank you so much for participating in the polls. Definitely sort of look forward to sort of munging that data and getting back to y'all with that as well. And doing another one of these again. I was kidding about the Revenue Revival podcast, but I'm in. I don't know about you guys, but I'm in. We could do this again sometime. It'd be a lot of fun. Awesome. Thanks again so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.